Hello, and welcome again to this short study in the Gospel of Mark. If you're viewing this video, I'm assuming you're going to be helping to teach our guided conversation in your Sunday school class. Thank you for offering yourself in this way. We continue in our study of the Gospel of Mark, meeting Jesus again in the Gospel of Mark. And today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 18 to 22, where Jesus talks about the discipline of fasting and also about this concept of new wine being placed in new wineskins. And it has to do with change. It has to do with how our lives are always changing. And so if I were teaching the lesson, I would begin with the question, what is one thing that comes to mind that you have had to adapt to and change in your life? What were the results and how did that feel? And give your group a chance to sort of talk about that. And then a further question that might be helpful to begin this study and this discussion would be, is if you grew up in the church, what's one thing that has changed in the church that you're glad has changed? And what is one thing that has changed perhaps that you wish hadn't changed or that you miss? The background to Mark chapter 2 is Jesus talking about forgiveness, about healing, about calling together broken people. Last Sunday, he gave this word that it's the sick people who need a doctor, not those who are well. And in verse 18 of chapter 2, we see Jesus being asked a question, why his disciples aren't fasting. And fasting we'll look at has a purpose, and you may want to ask your class what their experience has been with the discipline, the spiritual discipline of fasting. But fasting has a purpose in terms of bringing us into a closer relationship with God. And somewhere along the way, the people of Jesus' day, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, even John's disciples had lost track of the reason for fasting. They had forgotten that fasting was really to bring a person into the presence of God and a close relationship with God. And so then Jesus says this. He says, do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? In other words, if you experience the presence of the bride and groom at a wedding reception, do you not bring out the food and enjoy the presence and the celebration of the wedding? And his point there is that Jesus was present with them in announcing the presence of God's kingdom. And so it was only right that they wouldn't fast, but that they would experience joy and rejoicing in the presence of the kingdom of God. And so Jesus is contrasting their behavior as persons who were religious and observing this discipline of fasting, but they had forgotten that the discipline of fasting was for a purpose, and that was to bring them closer to God. And so Jesus reminds them that if you don't put a new piece of cloth on an old cloth, or it'll tear away. In the same way, you don't put new wine into old wineskins, or they'll burst. You put the presence of God in a fresh and new way that is always coming to us in new wineskins. You always take that new cloth and put it on other new cloth, so that the presence of God is what we seek in our lives. And so at the end of this study, there's a couple questions, and you can find this on the PDF you can download from the website. How has the wine of Jesus burst your old wineskins? And what do you anticipate God to continue to do as he pours new wine into your life? And then another question, what might the container look like that will hold the work of God's Spirit? Are we open to changing our practices to allow new wine to flow? And what might it take? Might there be different shaped containers for different people? What might that look like at SMC? And finally, the question, what's my greatest fear as I think about new wine and new wineskins? Can I trust God? Am I open to change? And am I able to draw close to God in his presence? What's most important to remember then as we change? And may God bless you as you lead this conversation. And you may find the study guide on the website, and wish you God's blessing as you lead your class.